On a screen, you can see a basic architecture of an API gateway. So here we have different parts, that is a user, client, API gateway, and some app servers or API servers. User uses website on a different client. It could be on a mobile, desktop, or a tablet PC. So these are nothing but the clients, and request will go to the API gateway via these clients. Now, whenever the request comes to the API gateway, the first thing happens is the authentication and authorization of that request. So it will check whether that person or the user who is using a website or a client is allowed to use API gateway and is allowed to perform some operations in an API gateway. So this is what authentication and authorization checks by checking the request at the start. So whenever the authentication and authorization passes, then it will route that request to the different servers. So what is the routing? Routing is a process of transferring the request from API gateway to the different backend servers, that is the API server 2, API server 1, database, or some other, depending on the request type or the header in a request. So this is a request routing, and this works as an entry point. So because of the routing, we will be able to transfer the request to the different backend servers. Then we have a rate limiting in an API gateway. Now what is a rate limiting? Whenever I receive a different or a multiple request, there are chances that the request could hamper the API gateway and they may bring down the API gateway server. So for this, we have a rate limiting where we actually set the limit per minute, per day, per week, or a per month to the client requests. So let's say if I set a limit of 1,000 requests per minute, then client will be able to only send 1,000 requests, or you can say in a like that API gateway will only accept the 1,000 requests. If the client sets 2,000 requests, what API gateway will do? API gateway will only access the 1,000 requests, and apart from that, like the remaining 1,000 requests will be dropped off and they will not be processed. So this is a rate limiting. Apart from this, we have a different features for security, throttling, logging, monitoring, etc. in an API gateway, which we are going to look in this series or the video of this series. Then what happens once the request, authorization, authentication, and routing is done? The request will go to the API server 2, 1, or database. Now, API server 2 or API server 1, if there is some business logic or a generic logic, that logic will be performed depending on a request header, and the output or the response is generated at a server side. This response will then go to the API gateway, and API gateway will send that response back to the client, and client will be able to view that response on a UI. The response may be positive or it may be a error. So let's say if API gateway connects to some of the services and that service is not responding, then API gateway will send the response as a server not responding. That is, we are handling error in a graceful manner. So this is the main use of a API gateway. It acts like a single entry point to the different servers. In a servers, we can connect directly to the database, or we may use a different third-party server, or we can create a different server to connect to the database. So it all depends on a requirement, and database could be any database like SQL, NoSQL, MongoDB, etc. That data will be again sent to the API gateway itself, and API gateway will respond back to the clients. There are multiple features which are not mentioned here of a API gateway, and those features will be explained in a later videos. So this is about the basic introduction of a API gateway architecture. To deep dive into details of each feature of a API gateway, stay connected with our series. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, you can just like the video, share our video, and subscribe to our channel. Also, press the bell icon so that you don't miss any notification. If you have any questions, you can just drop them in a comment section. See you in the next video.